it's important to realize that a lot of these commercial properties, even some of the smaller ones, these are expensive buildings. And you don't get to the place where you can purchase these types of buildings as an investor or a landlord without being well capitalized, without being sophisticated. And so that person typically is a professional investor or a professional landlord. Their objective is to make as much money as possible. Most practice owners are not capable of holding their own against landlords. They're in an inferior position to start with because the landlord owns the property and has control over the transaction. And so you just want to make sure that you hire representation. You treat it with the respect that it's due.
This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Everyone, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 337 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined us, and hope you'll be coming back for more. And also, if you haven't done so already, take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So I'm looking forward to you hearing my conversation today with Colin Carr. And this was just a really insightful interview that I did with him. Colin is a real estate broker, and his specialty is helping healthcare practices find appropriate lease space and real estate. And so it was very insightful, and particularly for me in my journey, because I'm in the process of expanding my practice and starting to look at some real estate and considering doing some leasing of additional office space. So this came at a good time for me personally. But anyway, one of the things to think about, though, besides particularly for group practices, the biggest expense that you have is usually your employees. And second to that would be your office space. And so Colin and I dive deep into this whole topic, and I think you're going to find it just really interesting and informative for you as you think about growing your practice, or even if you're thinking about maybe finding a different office space or thinking about leasing a space. I know my office, fortunately, my current office, I own the building, so that was a big step back in the day when I made that in 2017. But anyway. Looking forward to you hearing our conversation. And before we get to my conversation with Colin, one of the things I'd love for you to do is go over and check out the Practice of Therapy Collaborative. And if you'll just go to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And currently I've got the enrollment doors open. So if you would like to join this group, this mastermind group, this support community, however you want to frame that, love for you to join me. And you can find out more about it by going again to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And with this group, we meet once a week for just discussion and helping each other out with our different issues in our practices, anywhere from thinking about expanding or some of the other topics that have come up as how to create additional streams of income, kind of working your way through all of the insurance stuff for those practices that are insurance based. But as much as anything, it's a community and support group for those of us in private practice. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And go ahead and enroll now, because the doors will only be open for a few more weeks. So take advantage of that. And also, before we get to my conversation with Colin, I'd love for you to check out my friend Ashley's online store, mentalhealthwaretn.com. And it is an online store where she specializes in creating t-shirts and office decor items and all of those kinds of things, all the bling, as I like to call it, for those of us in the mental health field, and also for folks that are working through mental health issues and also addiction issues. But she's got a lot of great stuff there, and I'd love for you to go check it out. And that's mentalhealthwaretn.com. And real quickly, before we get to my conversation with Colin, love for you to hear from one of the members of the SiteCraft Network, along with some words from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi there. I'm super excited to welcome you back to the brand new season of Scaling Therapy Practice podcast. This is the show where we encourage you to take deliberate steps towards sustainable growth. I'm your host, James Marland. In season 2, we're specifically focused on one main topic: marketing for mental health providers. Every week, we're going to share about different parts of marketing, giving you simple tips and tricks to grow your mental health business. Every episode from season 2 will have a download or a handout from the show. So sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss these valuable resources. Good news, I'm not going to be doing the show alone. I've got some awesome friends who are going to be joining me from the SiteCraft Network. You're going to hear from Lisa Mustard, Steve Bisson, Dawn Gabriel, and other special guests. We've joined forces for this season to share helpful advice on things we've learned and even the mistakes we've made so that you don't have to make them. As the weeks go by, listen to us cover lots of topics on marketing, such as social media, how to market your own therapist, how to speak in public, and even how to start your own podcast or even just guest on podcast shows. We really want to hear from our listeners, so send us your questions, your comments, your thoughts to james@coursecreationstudio.com. That's james@coursecreationstudio.com. Make sure you check out season 1, which is out now, and it has lots of tips on scaling your therapy practice. Just go to coursecreationstudio.com and click the podcast section. So join us every Monday. We're going to learn a lot about intentional and sustainable growth for your therapy practice.
Ready to upgrade your practice from a rusty bicycle to a shiny new sports car? Buckle up, because TherapyNotes is here to turbocharge your journey. It's the comprehensive practice management system you've been craving, equipped with everything you need to navigate patient records, schedule seamlessly, host remote sessions, craft detailed notes, and tackle insurance billing with ease. And guess what? It's your trusty sidekick, available whenever and wherever duty calls. Picture having more quality time with your clients, all thanks to this digital assistant that never clocks out. Here's the kicker. It's Gordon approved, so you can trust it's the real deal. Bid farewell to paperwork headaches and embrace a new era of efficiency and top-tier care. Ready to level up your private practice game? Swing by practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and punch in promo code GORDON for 2 months on the house. Enjoy the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really excited to get to hear from Colin Carr on this episode. And we're going to be talking about real estate and our offices and all the things around that. Welcome, Colin.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Absolutely. So I've been doing real estate now for almost 24 years. I took a little bit of a unconventional route right out of high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do professionally, so I started working right away. I met a gentleman that owned a bunch of apartment complexes and just started interning or shadowing for him. And that was my entrance into real estate. So I did property management, multifamily for 3 or 4 years. I got into brokerage in my early 20s and started doing work for companies like Walmart, Wendy's, Blockbuster, large national retailers, and had a desire to start doing more often industrial work where I was working with individual business owners versus large corporations. And over a period of time, I stumbled across a couple of healthcare transactions and really enjoyed working with healthcare providers. And the summary as far as how I got to start this company, which we have today called Carr, which is exclusively representing healthcare providers. So it's commercial real estate, healthcare only. We're only on the tenant and buyer side, so the doctor side of the transaction. But the way that I got into that niche, if you will, is I was doing a lot of healthcare real estate, but I was working for a significant amount of large institutional landlords. And I had a number of transactions where these landlords were just in such a superior position to the doctors, and the doctors just got absolutely crushed in a handful of negotiations that I was on the landlord side of. And I watched a couple of healthcare providers lose literally like $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in deals where they were overpaying, they were missing, the opportunities to reset like base year expenses or operating costs to have them go down significantly. They were not negotiating the concessions like free rent, build-out allowance, all these other, things that are available in a deal. And so I had a number of transactions that happened over a very short period of time where literally the landlords walked away with hundreds of thousands of dollars more than they should have, and what we would have called a fair or market transaction. And just for me, the light bulb came on and said, look, these guys they're great people. They care about their communities. They care about their patients, their staff. They're doing the best they can with what they have, but they're completely out of their realm going up against professional landlords. And so I started doing a lot more tenant and buyer work in the healthcare space. I realized there was an entire opportunity there just to help the doctors and the practice owners capitalize. So I launched this company at the beginning of 2009. And today we are 15 plus years in. We're licensed in all 50 states. We work coast to coast. And as of this recording, we have over 5,000 clients that we're doing work for in some capacity with their office space or their real estate for their space.
Wow, that's so cool. And I think probably a lot of people in this space haven't really known that there were companies like yours that existed just to negotiate all of this stuff. So I guess maybe a place to start, just kind of knowing the audience, what are some of the basics we need to think about in terms of looking for office space or negotiating a lease, all of that kind of thing?
So let me just start with the fundamentals of commercial real estate. And this is really any form of real estate, but it's maybe a little bit less understood in commercial real estate. It's important to realize that a lot of these commercial properties, even some of the smaller ones, these are expensive buildings. And you don't get to the place where you can purchase these types of buildings as an investor or a landlord without being well capitalized, without being sophisticated. And so that person typically is a professional investor or a professional landlord. Their objective is to make as much money as possible. And there's no MSRP, like there's no suggested retail price or manufacturer's price of what stuff gets sold for. Like, you look at buying certain types of products or commodities, and there's like a national price. If you go to buy a Ford F-150, like Ford says, like, here's what you should sell it for with these finishes. There's no price like cap or margin in real estate that's considered fair. It's whatever the landlords want to do. And so healthcare providers, practice owners, business owners go into these deals and they think that, well, even if I don't get a great deal, it'll still be good enough. And that's completely wrong. Like, you can lose a couple $100,000 on a transaction, even on a 5-year lease, let alone a 7 or a 10 or a 12-year lease. So I think the first thing to understand is there's a lot of money on the line, and landlords want as much of that as possible. They don't care if you overpay by $500,000. Like, they're not going to feel bad about that. Just like if you were in a boxing match, the opponent's not going to feel bad if you get knocked out in the first 5 seconds. They don't have any obligation to make you feel good about yourself or to make you feel like you did a good job. And it's the same thing on residential. Like, you go to sell your house. We've seen this over the last 4 or 5 years at an unprecedented level. Like, houses are selling for like 50, 70, 80% more than they were purchased for a couple of years ago. Nobody feels bad about that. Everyone's like, hey, look, if someone's willing to pay this for my house, I'll take it. Even if I know for a fact it's not worth it. Landlords look at real estate the same way. They want the highest return. They want to give you the least amount of concessions. They want the most control over the legal terminology to put you in the most narrow place possible so you have the least amount of options or rights in the event something doesn't go right. And they have no qualms about that. So I think the fundamentals of commercial real estate need to be laid out as this. There's a lot of money on the line. You can lose a couple $100,000 very quickly, or you can also capture it with the right strategy. There's a lot of areas to get into complications and pitfalls too, not only just the financial, but the business terms, the non-economic terms, and just realize you're going up against professionals. And there's a lot of landlords that love to pretend like they're just the average Joe out there, just, want to make a fair deal, just they might come off as just kind of being, salt of the earth or kind of dopey or whatever. They know exactly what they're doing. They're very intentional with their strategy. They're networking and consulting with professional listing brokers. If they're not using one, they're still talking to them behind the scenes. And so I think the rules of engagement are you don't want to get knocked out in a transaction. Most practice owners are not capable of holding their own against landlords. They're in an inferior position to start with because the landlord owns the property and has control over the transaction. And so you just want to make sure that you hire representation. You treat it with the respect that it's due.
Yes. So one question that comes up when you speak of strategy, tell us a little more about kind of what that encompasses. I mean, as far as the strategy.
Yeah, that's a great question too. So when it comes to strategy, the landlords are sizing up everyone that contacts them. When I talk about landlords, they're probably working through a property manager or a listing broker or an agent, but that side of the transaction is sizing up who's showing up. When a healthcare provider shows up without representation, they're going to assume that person doesn't know what they're doing. They're going to assume they're not savvy, because if they were savvy, they'd be showing up with representation. If Chipotle looks at a retail center or Starbucks looks at a retail space, those are first-class retailers. They're not just going to have some random person. They're going to have their real estate agent doing the work for them. If it was a large office user, if it was like a Lockheed Martin or a Charles Schwab, they're going to have a professional helping them. And so landlords are accustomed to working through people that are sophisticated. And when someone shows up who's not sophisticated, they're going to realize that they don't have a real strategy. So that's one aspect, is representation. The next aspect is, what do those companies do? Those companies go to market. They look at all the top options. They narrow down to the top, let's say maybe 5, 6, 7 properties. They tour those properties. They look at them in detail, and then they negotiate on 3 or 4 properties simultaneously. And this is a difference of commercial real estate versus residential real estate. In residential real estate, you look at houses online, you work with an agent, you tour properties. And when you find that property, that house you like, you submit an offer, and it's usually in a contract form that if the seller says, yes, I like this offer, they sign it, you're in a binding contract. And so it's not like a non-binding offer, it's a binding offer. And commercial real estate, you negotiate in a non-binding format in what's called a letter of intent, or you can put together a request for a proposal. And it's very common to have 3 or 4 landlords going back and forth. It's very common to go 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations. And that's just a different game plan or a different strategy than in residential. And someone might say, well, why would you take all the time and effort to do that? And there's a couple of reasons. Number one, landlords are going to be a lot more competitive if they think that you are really playing the market and you're not going to be taken advantage of. If a landlord thinks that you're only negotiating on one property and you don't know what you're doing already, and you're not able to talk about what other landlords are offering, why would a landlord negotiate against themselves? There's no one else in the negotiation. You're there, but there's no one they're competing with. And so there's no motivation for a landlord to get really aggressive. When they know that other landlords are vying for the deal, it changes the way they approach it. They realize they can't come at you with ridiculous terms or with egregious language. They have to be a lot more intentional with how they position themselves. Otherwise, they're going to get kicked out of the game very quickly. So, the representation, the strategy, et cetera, those are probably the top 2 things that I would say change the strategy or change the entire opportunity for you. And the beauty of that is, if you're a healthcare provider, you're not having to control the process. You're fully in control as far as saying yes or no, but you're not setting the tempo, the pace. You're not dealing with the questions. You're not worried about answering incorrectly. It's like having an attorney in court or having a good CPA during an audit. You don't have to worry about, am I messing up? Am I saying the wrong thing? You've got a pro that's handling it for you. And that just puts you into a place of, it gives you peace. It gives you peace of mind in the process.
Right. Yeah. And what I'm thinking about as you're describing this is that you really the strategy is you want to kind of turn it so that instead of you courting the landlord is courting you to give you a good deal on the property because they know that you're looking at several others and you're going to choose the best deal.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. And that's exactly right. It's, in the scenario where it's just you and one landlord, I mean, anytime you're asking for something different, you're really just begging the landlord. Like, well, would you please give me a lower lease rate? Or would you please give me more
Mm-hmm.
money? And the landlords don't
Mm-hmm.
answer this way, but the answer is, why would I do anything for you that I don't have to do? And you just fully disclose that and said, what's the best deal you can give me on that vehicle right there? There's no reason for them to do anything besides the bare minimum they need to do to get the deal done. And so a
Right.
lot, they'll give you maybe a month of free rent, or they'll give you a little bit of money, and you think, all right, well, I got the landlord to move off their offer. They came down a little bit. They gave me some free rent or some allowance to build out, and you feel like you captured like some serious concessions. But what you don't realize, they just baked that into their first offer, and you left 100, 200, 300 grand on the table. So landlords are notorious for making you think that you did a decent job or you did a pretty good job or you should be proud of yourself, and they'll put on a Broadway performance. You really know what you're doing, or like they will say things that are just comical, and the practice owners will bite off on it all the time. It's, my son's 15 and a half now. He's pretty strong young man, but when he was 4 years old, we'd wrestle, somehow magically, he would beat me. So he's
Right.
a 4-year-old who weighs 50 pounds beating dad who weighs 200, and he'd go and tell his mom he beat me in wrestling. Like, yeah, there's a lot going on there, but a lot of healthcare practice owners are going home and like telling their spouse or telling their friends, I mean, I did a great job. This is what I got the landlord to do. And the landlord is the dad in the background that outweighs them by 200 pounds or 150 pounds, being like, man, you should have seen the guy that just signed a lease at my property.
Right. That makes sense. So to change gears just a little bit, as I shared with you, Colin, before we started recording, I'm in the process of looking at expanding my practice right now and starting to look at spaces and that kind of thing. And I guess it could vary from different parts of the country, but it seems like that there is a lot of office space available since COVID. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, real estate as a whole is broken into predominantly it's residential, commercial. You can get into other areas like agriculture or farmland, stuff like that. But let's just say we're breaking down into residential and commercial. And then once you get inside of commercial, you got different product types. So you got traditional office space, like you're referencing. You got retail space, like where you'd see a Chipotle or a Starbucks or a retailer. You got industrial space where, it could be they're, manufacturing a widget in there, or they're using it to store stuff and ship stuff out. You've got multifamily, like apartment complexes. There's all these different sub-markets of real estate. The office space is the sub-market of commercial real estate that has been hit the hardest by far. And the reason being is a lot of large companies were forced to send their workforce home, and they realized we can function pretty well. People are self-sufficient. We can still track their progress. Like, we know if they're working or not based upon their productivity. And we probably don't need to have people commuting 5 days a week and having all these other inefficiencies that occur when you've got large office spaces and so forth. And so a lot of those companies said, look, let's just get rid of our office space, or let's go from maybe like a large space down to a couple thousand square feet. And then people can come in maybe once a week to connect, or we can do a staggered schedule. Maybe you're in the office 2 days a week versus 5. And a lot of people realize I need a lot less office space. I need less locations. And so that's created a significant amount of vacancy in the traditional office space market. And so those landlords are right now the ones that are getting hurt in a lot of scenarios. Now, there's always going to be a sub-market or an area of town where it's more desirable. There's always going to be, the kind of the upgrading concept of I was in a class B, now I'm going to class A. So the best of the best properties are still doing very well. But the average, the class B or the below average that need some help or some work to upgrade those buildings, those are the places right now where there's a lot of opportunity. And so you're more concessions, lower lease rates, higher build out allowances. You're seeing landlords that are getting a lot more competitive to make those deals because they've got to get occupancy. When a building sits vacant or space sits vacant, they're not only not making money, Most of those landlords are leveraged and have a mortgage, and so they're going negative every month, but they still have all the operating expenses. So just like if you owned a house that was vacant, you still have to pay the property taxes, you still have utilities, you might still have an HOA fee. There's all these costs that go into running an office property. And so even if there's no mortgage on the property, they own it free and clear, which is very rare, a vacant space could still cost the landlord thousands of dollars per month. So they're getting a lot more motivated to make deals happen. Whereas like on the retail side, there are more franchise concepts, more quick serve, fast food, health and wellness, creative ideas. There's more retail franchises and more retail companies going to market right now than we've ever seen in the history of the world. So there's a lot more activity in retail, industrials on fire, multifamilies on fire, whereas office space, that's where the huge opportunity is right now.
Well, that's encouraging. And I think one of the things just in our profession, most of us had little or no training in the business side of things. And in particular, I know of very few people that know anything about doing real estate deals or negotiating office space and that sort of thing. So I think you bring up a really good point, which is people have heard from me on this podcast before, the importance of being able to not bootstrap it too much, but learn to outsource and find other people that can do what needs to be done that knows what they're doing rather than trying to figure it out on your own. I've learned from my mistakes in that several times over.
Absolutely. People will ask the question, well, why would somebody not hire a professional in any area? Like, let's go beyond real estate. Let's go to a consultant, or let's go to marketing, or an attorney or CPA. And for me, it's really boiled down to I've come up with like three main reasons, and I'm sure there's more than this, but I've got three. Number one is they don't know who to call. It's an issue. The second part is it's all about cost. Like, hey, I don't have the money to do this. I don't have the money to hire a consultant or to do a marketing campaign or to pay for SEO or whatever it is. So there's the financial aspect. And then the third one is they feel like they're going to lose control if they bring in someone else, and they're concerned or scared or fearful of making a mistake or someone else making a mistake for them. And so they try to lock on to, if I do it myself, even if it's not done perfectly, at least I'll know how it's done. And when it comes to real estate, all three of those are really bad ideas for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's great people out there, and you can find them by asking very specific questions of them. You can find them online. You can find them by talking to other people that you trust. Number two, there is no cost, or there should not be a cost for you hiring a real estate agent or broker if you're operating as a buyer or tenant. Commissions in commercial real estate are paid for by the landlord or seller, just like they are in residential real estate, paid by the seller. If you went to buy a house and you hired a broker, it is extremely rare to have to pay a buyer's agent a commission. The vast majority of deals have a seller, they hire an agent to list the property, and they have a commission that's built for two people. If you're buying a house and you show up without a broker, the listing agent just gets a double commission. So commercial real estate, same thing. Landlords pay commissions, they build it into the deal. You show up without a broker, the listing broker gets a double commission, or the landlord will just simply keep that money. So there should be no cost to you. You're actually gaining more control over the process. No one's signing a contract for you. No one's forcing you to do a deal. They're going to give you information you didn't have. They're going to introduce you to other people that you need to have on your team to have a more successful transaction. They're going to arm you with market intelligence to where you're not wondering if it's a good deal. Mm-hmm. And in the example of like going to market and having your broker research every property that meets your criteria, narrowing down to the top, like let's say maybe 5, 6, 7 properties, you tour those, and then choosing 3 or 4 properties to negotiate on, and maybe going 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations on those properties, you're not going to wonder if you're getting a good deal. You're not going to wonder if you have seen the right properties. Like, it eliminates the confusion. I mean, this would be like hiring someone who goes out to 7 car dealerships and gets the exact car you want with the exact features, negotiates with those dealers for you, and then brings you the final terms. It's a foolproof game plan to get you the peace of mind and the intelligence you need to decide what to do. And again, not only are you going to capitalize on better terms, but that peace of mind is invaluable. Like, nobody wants to sign a 5, 7, or 10-year contract where they're fully locked in and then realize later they lost $300,000 doing it. Right. Same thing for a CPA, same thing for an attorney. Same thing for the pros. Like it gives you that confidence that you're doing the best you can with what you have.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is really thinking about the money they spend in terms of it being an investment rather than just money that is lost. It's pretty simple math. If I gave you $200 and you brought me back 1,000, that's a no-brainer. Same concept, and I think that's important for people to remember.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, I do get the idea. There are some things like, look, if you want to vacuum the living room yourself versus paying someone, you can save money doing it. And you might say,
Hmm.
hey, I like vacuuming and I'm comfortable vacuuming, and that's great. That's not how real estate works, though. It's like you can file your own taxes, but as a business owner, if you don't have a CPA who's tracking all of the new tax laws, because the tax laws change literally every year, the forms change every year. There's
Hmm.
always things that are happening that are going before Congress or the Senate. Like there's a huge tax bill right now that affects anyone who owns a business that is in front of the Senate right now that the House already passed. It's like you've got to know that stuff. And if you're just guessing yourself on some online software program, like you're probably not capitalizing. You might be saving a couple $1,000s on a tax bill, but you just lost tens of thousands in additional write-offs or deductions. And it's the same thing with real estate. So anybody can
Yeah,
sign a lease. Anybody can
yeah.
call on a property, anybody can search online. That's not the strategy, though, and that's not where the real value is presented to the client.
Well, Colin, I've got to be respectful of your time, and I'm sure I'll probably get you back on the podcast to talk some more about this because there's so much more to cover around this whole topic. But tell folks how they can get in touch with you if they want to connect and talk about all this with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the best way to get in touch with our company is our website, and it's carr.us, CARR.us. We've got expert advisors and agents coast to coast, so you can click to find an agent in your area. And a lot of people might hear this and they say, well, I'm maybe 3 years into a 5-year lease, or I just signed a 10-year lease. You can still pick up the phone and call us or send an email. We'll do a lease evaluation for you. We'll tell you if you did a good job, an average job, or a bad job on your last lease. We'll tell you if there's options to purchase in your area and how they compare to leasing. But we're more than happy to have a conversation, well in advance so that you have some realm of information or that peace of mind of, hey, listen, here's where I'm at currently, and here's the right timeline for my next transaction. That's a big one too. People miss the right timeline, start too early, start too late. So if you want to find someone in your area, we're happy to connect you with them. And then also, we do have a lot of resources too. So if you do want to get more educated, so not to control the process, but just so that you're better equipped for your next transaction, we've got a tremendous resources tab that has literally hundreds of FAQs, glossary, videos, articles. So if you want to get more information on commercial real estate and how you can leverage it for your practice, we've got a lot of really great options for you as well.
All right. Awesome. And we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary for folks to get to it easily. Well, Colin, thanks again for being on the podcast. Well, a big thanks to Colin for joining me on the podcast. I hope that was as interesting to you as it was me. I learned so much from him and given me a lot to think about as I begin to look at additional spaces for my practice. And I'm sure I'll be referring back to Colin several times as I go through this whole process. But you should be sure and check his things out at carr.us. And you can find out more about the services his company offers. They have agents all over the country. So, it's a big operation if I dare to say that. Also, be sure and check out the Practice Collaborative and go over to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. It's a membership community that's there to support you in your practice, and the doors are open for enrollment just a few more days or weeks, depending on when this episode comes out. But be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And also be sure and check check out our sponsor, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and couldn't work without them. But you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And when you go there, you can try them out for 2 months for free just by using the promo code Gordon, Gordon. So be sure and check them out. And again, I'm very grateful to them for sponsoring this podcast. So that's it for this week, folks. Hope you're having a good week or weekend. I think this episode's coming out the week of 4th of July. So, yeah, happy 4th of July or Independence Day if you're celebrating it. I'm going to be getting together with family over there at our lake place over in North Carolina. So looking forward to being back over there. Haven't been there this summer because we've had some water line problems, but I digress. So, anyway, take care, folks. And thanks for listening to the podcast. And be sure and leave us a review. If you think about it, wherever you listen to your podcast, it only helps other people find us by doing that. And plus, I love the honest feedback. Take care, folks. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.